We're having an unscheduled press conference today because we wanted to get the information out that is accurate. There was an incident that occurred just shortly after midnight Saturday evening, Sunday morning into Sunday morning that occurred up on Court Street. And noting that there's a lot of information that is swirling out there in social media, I asked my police chief, Tom Pyle, as well as Service Safety Director Andy Stone, to be here for this press conference as they describe, or as the chief describes, the factual information as we have it that came out that night. Chief?
Thank you, sir. Our department received a phone call from what we now know is a civilian inside the J Bar on the corner of Court and State Street, who had been asked by a worker inside the J Bar to call police for an unruly patron who had been ejected at least once from the bar and who had returned and was causing staff issues at the front door. Our officers happened to be doing bar checks in the area and responded rather rapidly. At first, they did not see the individual that bar staff had been complaining about. However, bar staff did point to the individual to identify them, and so our officers went to that individual to identify them and see exactly what had taken place. When they approached that individual, the person tried to essentially resist the officers and tried to, according to the officers, try to flee. That resulted in an altercation involving two of our staff initially with this individual. The altercation ended up going onto the ground. And then additional staff arrived, and some of this incident has been captured and put on social media. I can tell you that the video that we have seen that's been posted on Twitter, at least that I've seen posted on Twitter, catches only the very tail end of the incident. There is significant more to the altercation and the incident that we have amassed in our investigation, which is ongoing. The person was arrested and charged, taken into custody, was offered EMS treatment for a small abrasion to the, I believe, the right hand, and a taser barb, a wound, which is standard operating procedure for us when a taser is deployed, and we did deploy taser on this incident. I've seen the social media commentary, and I could say it's completely, the commentary is without context, and the allegations are completely baseless. And as this case is borne out through the proper venue, which is the court of jurisdiction, Athens Municipal Court, all of this information will come to light. And certainly it will be available to the public when that process is completed. But right now, this person that's arrested, Tyler, let me see here, Ty Patrick Beeler, enjoys a presumption of innocence, and will so until he appears in court and addresses the charges. So right now he's been charged with obstructing official business M2, I believe, and resisting arrest M1. And with that, I will take questions.
There's been a few reports that it was unconfirmed who the identity of the person that you ended up arresting. Can you talk about how you confirmed the identity of the person that they said was involved in the J-Bar incident and then the person you ended up arresting?
Well, we're still receiving video from a couple different sources, but what we have amassed is first of all, we had a proper clothing description, height description, age description, race description, and I don't know if I already mentioned it, but clothing description, and a very specific clothing description. And I think this part of the controversy might be wrapped up in the fact that the individual put on a different shirt after he left the J-Bar area. And so some people may not have recognized him without the advantage of having a very descriptive type shirt on underneath that flannel shirt. So, but we're confident it's the right person, and we have video purporting the activities that occurred in front of the bar as well. So we're quite confident that we do have the right individual.
Can you explain the protocols that you have for takedowns, arrests like this, and if they've changed at all in the last 5 years, 10 years, what you do with a resisting arrest type situation like this?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer your question. Our use of force policies change on a regular basis, not dramatically, but they do change for varying court cases. We're a Lexipol agency. And what that means is the city of Athens and the police department pays a good sum of money every year to a policy risk management specialty firm that specializes in law enforcement, and it's a very robust policy system. And they have attorneys. This company has staff attorneys, and they follow case law in Ohio and around the nation. And so we get very up-to-date court rulings, and we adjust our policies, specifically the use of force policy on a regular basis. And not only that, but because we're a Lexipol agency, our staff is not trained annually on the policy. They're trained monthly on the policy. We provide what's called daily training bulletins to our staff on a monthly basis, and inevitably every month there are use of force trainings that involve some of those case rulings that are very recent. So yes, the policy does change, but not in such a dramatic way that it would interfere with officer decision making on this particular incident. What I have seen, based on the information that I have available to me today, the officer's use of force was reasonable and within the policy that we have in place.
Are you surprised at the reaction and response of the people, the bystanders who are on the street, who are videotaping and who are catcalling and the like? And how difficult is it for officers to continue to do what they were doing in that situation?
Well, it's very difficult because you have divided attention skills, and it's certainly in the reports that I've read weighed on the officers' decision making. And one of the issues that has been raised was the number of officers that were used to effect this arrest. And the only thing I can say is that was done for safety, as evidenced by the lack of injuries to the individual. So we do that for a variety of reasons, safety being the primary one. So that's the number of officers in this incident that it took to safely effect this arrest. But also I would add that the crowd response plays a role into that. And these officers understand that the crowd is unruly, needs to be maintained, and their attention is divided. So getting that person secured in handcuffs and away from that scene is of paramount importance. And so that certainly weighed into the number of officers. So I've seen the criticisms that was an excessive use of the numbers of officers, and I disagree with it wholeheartedly.
What do you have video of? You said you were doing other video. Was that right, of the arrest?
That's correct.
Do you have video proceeding what has been seen out there?
We do, and we're not at liberty to release it. That's considered evidence in this case that is continuing to be investigated, but it's certainly already been charged and is in the hands of the city prosecutor's office. And I've met with them twice this morning. We are in agreement that in any other case we would not release video of this type, and when we will follow standard procedure. But that video will come out as the case progresses, I'm sure, in court.
How many different videos do you have?
Couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I want to say 3 or 4, and there's potential for 2 or 3 to come in, additional to come in. And we've also obtained some video off of the Twitter feed that is already public that we've put in the case file as well.
Can you describe what's on that video?
It's just the same person that we've arrested standing in front of the J bar, acting in the manner has been purported. So,
Chief Pyle, is there a separate investigation that's conducted by the police agency in terms of use of force, whenever there is use of force?
Well, part of our policy is that we review every use of force incident, so not just the ones that are problematic or perceived problematic or that rise to this kind of social media fervor, I think is the word. So every use of force that happens in our agency, and sometimes I would say on average there are between 20 and 40 use of force reports a year, some involving nothing more than a use of force beyond routine use of handcuffs, which is our policy. Any use of force that goes beyond just normal placing of handcuffs on a person gets reported. And so with that in mind, like I said, we average about 20 to 40. Every one of those goes through a 4-position review process where actually it's 5. So the reporting officer prepares a use of force report specifically and an addendum for any taser use. That gets sent to the shift supervisor who reviews it, who forwards it to the captain, who reviews it, who forwards it to the investigative supervisor who reviews it, who forwards it to the training supervisor who reviews it, and ultimately it lands on my desk and I review it, and then those are filed. And we have those going back, I want to say, 3 to 5 years.
How long will that review process?
We had the use of force report in our hands this morning, and I believe it's on the captain's desk, and so those things don't typically take, they don't happen overnight or in a day, but I would expect that we'd have it fully reviewed midweek.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't expect to see anything in it that's not in the full unredacted investigative police report that we have also reviewed. So.
Going back to the report, it talks about the arrestee being unarmed. Can you talk about the differences between the protocol that you would have for use of force if this person had been reported armed, or if you knew that they were armed, versus how they were?
It would have looked very different. If the person had been reported as armed, the officers would not have tried to make contact with them on Court Street. They probably would have waited until the person was away. I mean, this is all supposition and speculation, but it just depends on the circumstances. But to confront somebody that's been reported as armed and agitated or belligerent would not be, approaching in a crowd on Court Street would not be a wise tactic. So it would have looked significantly different. And then the officers would have been in much higher alert. I think in this instance, the officers simply wanted to identify the person that had been pointed out to them by bar staff as being unruly earlier, to make sure that they at least had identification in case somebody came in tomorrow or the next day and wanted to file an assault report. And it was then when they were trying to complete that task that the person became resistive, and we know where this landed. So,
may I ask what the names of the 3 officers were?
Yeah, that was Officer A.J. Spear, Officer Dustin Wesselhoft, and Officer Ethan Dorr.
I will have to ask you, there was a civil suit that was filed against the city with regards to Officer DeWare and the city police department in general earlier this year. That also alleged excessive use of force. Can you please respond to that?
There's no relation, no correlation at all.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Somebody over here had a question.
So no other questions?
I wanted to ask, obviously, Mr. Stone and the mayor, you're here. Why did you feel it was important for you all to have a presence here along with the chief?
I felt it was important for all of us to be here, largely because of the misinformation that is swirling out there, and knowing how important it was to have this kind of emergency press conference to get it out there. We've been in close contact with our Ohio University counterparts. They're aware of this information as well. But, it was, I think, vitally important because as the chief executive for the city, it was important for me to be here and to make sure that the facts are what are getting out there and not the disinformation or misinformation that is swirling.
I would tack on to that, what the mayor just said, that I've monitored some of the Twitter comments on the original post, and I would say it's wildly unfair for the university to take criticism over this incident. The university police had nothing to do with this incident. They only responded in a support role to help with the crowd control, and that was their exclusive role in this. They had nothing to do with the arrest, nothing to do with the investigation, nothing to do with the pre-arrest. And this person is not an Ohio University student. And so I saw the criticism, and I wanted to make sure I pointed out that the university has no fault in any part of this incident. So, and then I would also add that we're still taking in and collecting information. And so if there are people out there that have additional video that they think relates to this and that might depict something, we would ask them to come forward. As well, I would ask that anybody that feels that they were a victim of a crime related to this incident, that they come forward. And we will certainly investigate that,
Do you have any further response to the suggestion that race or there's a racial motivation in the officer's actions?
Well, I think the fact that we received a complaint and the person was identified by bar staff is evidence enough. I mean, this isn't like this person was singled out of a group of people because of race. I think that's just flatly false. So, you had a question?
Yes, I was not at the recent West Side meeting where residents were talking about crime, but I heard from someone who was there that at that meeting you promised or said that you would fire any officers who displayed racist behavior. And is that true? And also, what must an officer do to be considered racist by your standards?
That's kind of a loaded question, really. I mean, yes, I have made the statement and will continue to make the statement that I don't want to employ racist cops. And so I think it was a little out of context, that statement, because somebody asked if we provided cultural diversity and implicit bias training, and we do. I said, however, that I do not want to train away racist police officers. I want to terminate racist police officers. Now, whether I can or not is another story, and another completely different notion, but that would be where I sit on that subject matter, all right? So now what a person has to do, I don't know how to answer that question, but I don't see racism in this incident. I just don't. So I couldn't tell you what that would look like in order for me to want to hire somebody. I mean, I have some obvious ideas, but I know that it's not this. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Okay.
On the subject of body cams, did the officers have them on in this incident? Were they on, and is that implemented universally right now?
Unfortunately, no. We don't have them yet. We were hoping to have them at the beginning of end of August, beginning of September. They were delayed by the manufacturer. This is a perfect type of incident that I would have loved, and by the way, my officers would have loved to have had body cameras. Because that would have provided additional footage and additional perspectives. But those cameras, we just got the shipment last week, and our scheduled training is the end of November. And the reason it's so late is because the only other date the trainer had was the Thursday and Friday before Halloween weekend, and we can't allow that to happen. So because we're just too short-staffed that week. So our training will be delayed until the third week of Thanksgiving, and I hope to have the body cameras deployed 1st of December.
And I'd like to echo what the chief just said, because our officers do want to have these body-worn cameras. Unfortunately, the company that we're purchasing them from, kept finding that they were being back-ordered, and so, yeah, and then there's a lot of training that goes into having the body-worn cameras and using them properly. So, and I certainly agree with what the chief said, that in an incident like this that occurred Saturday night, Sunday morning, the cameras would have been invaluable to us.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on how this person resisted arrest. Was it just attempting to flee? And how does that translate to a perceived need to use the amount of force that was used?
Well, I'd like to know what you mean by the amount of force before I answer that question.
Just the response. Like, how did the person's actions lead up to your police officers using the response that they did?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned that I would be trying to relaying information that would taint a potential jury pool by talking about that too much, because I'd basically be depicting for you what is evidence that will come out in court. So the only thing I could say is that I've watched the video, and there was active resistance, and that I feel the use of force by the officers was reasonable and restrained, quite frankly. And so your question can be answered when that information is revealed through the court process. And so, and I'll leave you to be the judge of whether it's justified or not. So you have to remember, though, that when it comes to video, and I think this is key for everyone in the future to remember, especially when we have body cameras, we're all sitting here on Monday, literally, this is the term for Monday morning quarterbacking these kinds of incidents, where we know the outcome of the incident as it transpired. We know what happened on that video, and we can watch it and know before we even watch it what happened. But the officers and the people involved in that video do not have that perspective and do not have the advantage of hindsight. They don't know how that video ends, okay? So it's important, because the current use of force court rulings, and have been in place for decades, considers that these incidents at the time cannot be judged by people like us on Monday afternoon, where we know the outcome of the incident, but have to be judged from the perspective of the officers. So that's, I think, one of the standards that convolutes these kinds of issues and leads to these kinds of things. So.
Are there any other questions for you? Well, thank you all for being here. And for those of you who are tuning in, thank you for watching this special press conference. And as there are updates, we will make sure that those get out there. Thank you.